One was in my very early days. It was, believe it or not, you're going to really laugh at this, as old as, convenience stores and gas stations were a new thing, right? This was the idea of putting food with gas. For a lot of oil companies, it was a big deal. And it was actually with Exxon in Canada. And so I pumped gas for 4 weeks, literally to understand what customers were doing. The Exxon allowed us to build stores, like literally design them, how should they look, what the product should be. So I spent a year doing this and got really deep into convenience retail. But they didn't want to make a decision about building these things, and I was really upset because in fact, it got to the point where the client team and the McKinsey team we said, if they don't want to do this, we're going to leave and go and build this business because it's a huge opportunity. And my mentor, who was a partner, said, and I was going, these guys, God damn it, I don't know why they don't, this is so obvious, it's $1 billion, And I remember my mentor, he said, Dom, these guys are really smart people. They're not idiots, right? So there's a reason they're not doing it. And it's your fault, it's your problem that you didn't figure out why. So I want you to spend 6 weeks and you're going to figure out what's going on. And what I found out was it was a big learning for me, was you've got to understand how an organization works, how decisions are made. And you can understand it at one level, but you've really got to understand it. So I went and looked at major investment decisions that they'd made over the last 20 years. I talked to different people, and I found out, simply in this case, it was not that the opportunity wasn't large, but at the time, I think oil prices were $22 a barrel. If oil prices went to $30, it would just, $1 billion is chicken feed. It just would blow out so it wasn't relevant. And to then now you're going to be a retailer and you're going to have food, and you can imagine
what do our engineers know about that?
Yeah, but they ended up doing it, which I was very happy about afterwards. But I've never forgotten it. Organizations are smart, and there's reasons why they don't do things. And what it taught me was, whenever you go into an organization, you've got to understand the culture. There's a book, one of my favorite books, called The Constraints of Corporate Tradition, which a guy named Alan Cantrow wrote. And it's from a competitor firm, by the way. He was at Booz Allen. And then he joined us afterwards, but he wrote it it's a book. To me, it's like a Bible, because it tells you how to understand a place before you go in, because you can't just plunk stuff down. And it's good for leaders too. If you're coming in to a place, you better understand the culture. So that was one. I think the things that we look for is really, if I was to say a couple of things in particular, one is it's leadership. And what I mean, everyone says leadership. What does that mean? It's initiative taking. Do you see something you want to make happen and you actually do it? Do you have a track record? And it's not so much about being the head of a club or an organization. That's good. I think that's a good thing to do, and that's a sign. But it's also just building something. It doesn't have to be big, but you get people together to actually make something happen. Initiative taking is really important, I think, because it takes energy. It means you're able to influence people without power, which is what we do. We can't tell people what to do. They have to want to do it because of what. So it's initiative taking, building things.
So around Texas, elsewhere in the country, there is a robust conversation around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that conversation is taking place at McKinsey and around the world with the clients.
Well, I think there's a much broader recognition than there ever has been, but it's not good enough yet, if you know what I mean. I think we're in the early stages, but the good news is it's on the table, I think. And it's not because diversity is a good thing. I think it's an economically right thing. Do you know what I mean? And so we also are trying to take our own medicine in McKinsey, because we obviously believe in diversity, and it's important to us because it's about talent, right? We can't claim to be a place that attracts the best talent in the world if we're missing in action or have less than the share of those groups, if I might call it, that are out there. And we are weak in a number of areas with women in particular with the Black community, where there's areas where we just have to drive things. Our gay, lesbian, that's a very vibrant, important group, but I think again we can do more on that. So it's an area that I think there's a lot of importance, but it's the economic rationale that actually is driving a lot of this. And I think those organizations that don't embrace this are going to have some serious trouble. I mean, I think this whole thing with Twitter that's been going on, in Uber, it's more Uber, it's a bit more in particular, but you got to be careful how you, because I think there's been a shift that's going on in the world too around consumers. Consumers are having more power than they ever have. And that's, for business, is not to drone on here, but I remember Jack Ma at Alibaba saying, we were at an event, it was in Singapore, and he said, I want to make sure you guys understand, it's now a C to B world, not a B to C world. And I remember going, whatever, I mean, it's interesting, sounds like he goes, he said, you don't understand what I'm saying. It's C to B, the consumers are driving business. It's about, you need to understand the data.
Right.
And I think there's consumers that when they look at things like diversity or how companies handle issues, they can give you a death blow. And that hasn't been as much of an effect.
And they have
before.
a megaphone.
They got a megaphone
that
now.
didn't exist before.
That's right? Exactly, yeah. So I think it's a big issue, but it's glacial speed in terms of change.
Thank you so much for coming out today. You spoke a lot about your own leadership development, and I was wondering, especially in your own prestigious position, how do you act and conduct yourself when you're very conscious of the fact that you're on the steep end of the learning curve?
So when I'm learning, when I don't know what's sort of going on, or
and you're managing other people.
Yeah, well, I think this gets a bit back to what the dean said about the complementarity requirement. I think because so take an example right now. An area where I feel very uncomfortable is machine learning. Because I sort of understand it, but I could not explain that to the dean. Right. I'd be nervous about if he started probing me and saying, really? So tell me how the data sets work. Right. He wouldn't take him very long to sort of say, okay, this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. But what I can do is I know how to translate what that can do for the business and what that means your organization has to do. So what I just try and do is just be comfortable and be honest about what you don't know. What people don't like is BS artists who act like they know, and you can smell it very quickly when someone doesn't know, and you lose credibility. No one, I think, expects people to know everything. So I think being very honest about it, saying, I don't know this, but this is how. But I do know how this could affect what you're doing here. I don't know the mechanics of it, but I know the implications of it. So that's how I try and do it. And I think the other way is you got to learn how you learn. Like for me, one of the best ways I learn is I'm not very good sitting in my office on a screen doing, going through something, a document. What I'm in my best at is if I join a colleague with a client who is talking about the concept to the client. Then I learned about, most of my learning happens that way. I'll be with a colleague who's developed some new concept and strategy, the power curve, right?
This is, GE made a very major pivot from being basically an advanced manufacturing company, a well-known advanced manufacturing company, to saying they want to be a software company. And it wasn't a gimmick. The reason they did that, this is from Jeff Immelt, was if you take a locomotive, which is one of the many products they produce, they spend a lot of money focusing on, the metal that's used in the wheels, the power input-output ratio, the manufacturing, the power, the resiliency of that vehicle. And the way you measure the sort of the asset value of that vehicle is its average speed. That's the value to a company, like a railroad company. And this may be a weird sort of piece of information, but the average speed of a locomotive in the United States is about 22 miles an hour, right, every hour per day. If you can increase that by 1 mile an hour on average, for someone like Burlington Northern, that's a $250 million profit opportunity. So what Jeff Immelt said is, I don't want an Uber coming in here, working off our machines and figuring out the analytics of how that locomotive could move through it. We need to own the analytics and the software and the sensors that go on that side. And that's why you see the Internet of Things becoming such a huge transformation in industry. We know about cars. The only thing I'd say with this one, this is again how we're going to see a lot of competition coming from other sectors, right? We used to, at least I was taught in McKinsey, when you think about competitive strategy, you think about the companies that are in your sector, right? If I'm a banker, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about the automotive industry. Well, today you better think about what's going on in other industries. One example I'll give you here is if you think about cardiac surgeons, right, which is a very important, profession. It's actually it's a big business. If you're one of the best cardiac surgeons in New York, you probably don't think too much about the automated vehicle, but you should, because unfortunately, and this isn't a good topic to talk about after lunch, but most of the hearts that come for the heart transplants are supplied by car accident victims, right? So you're going to see a sudden change in your supply chain, if I might use that phrase, if you're a cardiac vision. So these are things that you need to think about.
So much to coming to UVA. My name is Sean, undergraduate, study politics and commerce. I have a question for you is, what worries you the most as a leader for McKinsey and the global business community?
I have quite a lot of worries I have. I think, one I actually worry quite a lot about is cybersecurity, because we do a lot of confidential work for about 2,500 institutions around the world. Some of them are governments, so they're companies that are working in technology, and I worry about that Eric Holder comment about being hacked, right? And that affects our trust. So that's one level.